Hello, and welcome to our podcast, Domestic Workers Organizing for Legal Change in Asia. In this limited series podcast, you'll hear from experts across Asia who work to ensure the realization of domestic workers' rights by campaigning for law reforms, lobbying government officials responsible for implementing legislation, and representing workers when their rights have been violated. They share breakthroughs, setbacks, and ongoing struggles. I'm your host Kritika Dinesh, and in this first episode, we're joined by Fish, who is the regional coordinator of the International Domestic Workers Federation, IDWF, in Asia. Despite having the most domestic workers in the world, organizing domestic workers in Asia is more recent compared to other regions. Domestic workers are, by the nature of their work, in private homes, isolated as a group. Traditional mindsets about servitude and home life make it hard for domestic workers to see themselves as workers. Fish walks us through what organizing looks like in this context and unpacks the different ways domestic workers achieve collective rights, including how domestic workers' organizations are registered and recognized by governments and employers. Fish also shares insights about why there's little uptake by national governments of Convention 189, which is the International Convention for Domestic Workers' Rights, and what actions IDWF is taking to change this. Stay tuned till the end to hear about Fish's journey in the domestic workers' movement. Thank you so much, Fish, for joining us today. To start us off, could you tell us a little bit about IDWF and its presence in Asia?
In the IDWF, we have 88 affiliates in 68 countries. The affiliates are all domestic workers, membership-based unions, if they are allowed to form union, or associations. In Asia, we have 17 affiliates from 14 countries. Many of them are formed in the past 20, 30 years. So Asia, if we talk about organizing of domestic workers in Asia, is relatively younger compared to other regions like Latin America.
Okay, that's really interesting. Like, why is that the case that it's much more recent in Asia?
We have actually Asia has the biggest number of domestic workers in the world. It is the region that has the biggest number of domestic workers. I don't have a particular answer for that, probably because of we still have a lot of traditional thinking about how people see domestic workers as maids and servants, and that really has given much constraint for domestic workers to be recognized, not only for the public and the society, how they see them as workers, but also the domestic workers themselves very often see themselves, I'm also maid and servant, I'm nobody. Yeah, they also don't see themselves as domestic workers. So many of our affiliates in the forming of the organization, they do a lot of training and education, reaching out to talk to the domestic workers one by one, bit by bit, to talk with them and to aware them, you are a worker. So we really start from the very fundamental and basic.
So that leads to my second question. So just for our listeners, like once C189 gets ratified, what happens? Are countries then mandated to have reforms in their national systems?
Oh, yes. Once C189, the International Labour Convention on Domestic Workers, was adopted in 2011, then the member states of the UN, the different countries, have to do their homework. So they have to check on their law and also ratify the convention. ratification means they have to make sure that their laws and policies are in line with the C-189, which is basically the recognition of domestic workers' rights and status as workers.
And how has this worked in Asia? Have you seen like many countries going and just ratifying and changing the laws, or has it been more difficult since 2011?
Yeah, since 2011, very sadly to speak, we still, until now, we only have one country who has ratified the C-189, the Philippines. Until now, only one, yeah, while the other regions, they have more. So I think the Asia and the MENA region, the Middle East and the North Africa are really in the bottom line if we talk about the rights for domestic workers. So in Asia, we have the Philippines. In the Philippines, they have the Kasambahay law, meaning the domestic workers law. They have some wage protection, social protection, etc. And our affiliates, United, has been doing organizing and has been a lot of dialogues with the governments. In other countries, many of us, the affiliates in Asia, has been fighting for inclusion of domestic workers in the labor law. For example, in Nepal, the labor law has been changed in 2017. So now domestic workers are recognized in the labor law. And there are countries who are fighting for a separate domestic workers law if it is too much difficult to change the labor law. So currently, actually, in Indonesia, the Jala PRT, our affiliate organizing domestic workers, and has established 8 domestic workers unions in 8 provinces. They are fighting for the domestic workers law to be adopted at the parliament. So there have been ongoing protests in front of the parliament in Indonesia.
Wow, that's really inspiring. And so you spoke about these affiliates in different countries. So could you tell us more about who are these affiliates? What's the nature? How are they organized? Are they trade unions? And earlier you spoke about membership-based organizations. How does it look like?
Yes, our affiliates are all democratically run, membership-based organizations and union, meaning it is the members to decide for the union. The highest decision making are the domestic workers at the annual general meeting or congresses. So they will elect the leadership of domestic workers to operate and execute plan that are proposed by the domestic workers and solve problems when they have, and also to negotiate and to represent domestic workers when there will be dialogues with the government, with the others, and media interview, etc. In Asia, we don't have a lot registered union. It's only Hong Kong, Philippines, Nepal, India, where we have registered domestic workers union, meaning they are registered as a union and they have got protection under the trade union laws in the countries. And they have the union status if we talk about the bargaining and representation. The majority of the affiliates in Asia of domestic workers are registered as association. They may register as association, or they may just have a group but not registered. So we also have one affiliate in South Korea who is running as a registered cooperatives.
Okay. And registering as a trade union, would you say is more advantages? What are the advantages like once you're registered as a trade union of domestic workers?
Once we are registered as a trade union, of course, we are seen as union, we are in the union movement, although even when we are organized in the association, there is still some how the other unions see us, how the government see us is still, sometimes they see us as NGO, but actually under the definition of the ILO, any workers organizations are unions. So all our affiliates are just the same as unions under the definition of the ILO, but they may not get the union registration by the government. So if we are able to get registered as a union, it depends on the national law on the trade union protection. For example, in Hong Kong, the trade union ordinance protect the rights of union in a few ways. For example, the union representative can represent workers at the labor tribunal. At the labor tribunal, employers, workers cannot hire lawyers to ensure the cost will be not too much, and also to ensure that the workers have easier access and process for the labor tribunal. And it is the union who has its status to be able to represent the workers. And if the members, the workers being members of the trade union, if there are some union activities, then the employers cannot discriminate the workers or fire, dismiss the workers due to their union activities. So that these are some very basic for trade union protection if we are able to get registered. And then in other countries where the trade union has more protection, legally speaking, they may have collective bargaining agreement setting so that the trade union will be sitting in the collective bargaining agreement table with the employers and also the government so that they can set together the standard for the conditions.
Okay. You mentioned the negotiation table, the employers, government, and the domestic worker organization or union. So I'd be interested to know about the employers. Are employers organized across Asia? Are the employers organizations? What does employers organizing look like?
Yes, the employers of domestic workers are individuals in different households. So if you compare to the employers or business association who are companies, corporates, enterprises, that is very much different from the employers of domestic workers who are individual. And when the employers of domestic workers are individual, domestic workers are working in private households, then actually the government has a bigger role to play in this. So if we are talking about the employers of domestic workers, whether there have been association formed, this is also an important question because many of the employers are not organized into their association. So that will give a question mark on who will be sitting in the negotiation table representing the employers. But somehow we do have a few of the organizations that represent employers. We have employers of Migrant Domestic Workers Association in Hong Kong. They have been always the spokesperson on the issue of domestic workers representing employers in Hong Kong. And in other cases, some of our affiliates reach out to the residential association where the house owners associations who are often hire domestic workers can represent the employers of domestic workers. So we also reach out to these associations of residential or apartment or area residence association to be the counterpart of the domestic workers in the negotiation table.
Okay. So that is how employers are sort of organizing or organized. And what about domestic workers? We spoke a bit about it at the organizational level, but as we all know, domestic workers work in private homes. They are often isolated from each other. They don't have office spaces to sort of meet their colleagues or any other opportunity to discuss their working conditions. So, in such a situation, how do domestic workers organize? Like, could you just walk our listeners through the basic steps of how organizing for domestic workers looks like?
Yeah. Many people will say organizing domestic workers are difficult in the sense that if you compare to organizing of other workers, you just go to the factory in one workplace, you have everybody, every workers there. But for domestic workers, they are scattered into different private households. So that means we have to walk a lot. We have to reach out to the community, to the area, go to house to talk to the domestic workers. And domestic workers do come out to do shopping for food for their employers in the markets. We go to the markets, we go to the bus or public transport to talk to them. And if they have weekly day off, usually they get together in the parks or gardens, like in the countries of destination of migrant workers. The migrant domestic workers often will come together in certain area, usually in the parks or in somewhere that is comfortable for them to meet with people from the same country to enjoy their home food, the food from their home country, etc. So, so we need to do a lot of community-based organizing, and walk a lot and talk to the workers one by one. Talking to workers one by one, and we organize activities. Sometimes, actually, very often, we organize the activities in the home of the domestic workers or the backyard in places where domestic workers live. Or if there is a good employer, we can talk to the employer or the village head to share their home place for us to have domestic workers to meet. So we have very often we have different area groupings in the community.
And is organizing more difficult with live-in domestic workers who live within the employers' homes? Like, do you use like special strategies to reach them? I know in some countries they reach out through social media, WhatsApp, because it's sometimes very difficult for the worker to just get out and meet anybody.
Currently, among IDWF, the most organized are the live out domestic workers working for multiple households. Yeah, because they can have their own time in their own house. Although they do have family responsibility, which is another heavy burden for them, but they are more accessible than the live-in domestic workers. For live-in domestic workers, if they have weekly day off, then it is still better. For example, the migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong and some of the migrant domestic workers in Taiwan and Singapore, then you find everybody in the park. Then it is still reachable. But for migrant domestic workers who are living and also prohibited for going out of the home and even weekly day off, then that is the most difficult, and they are the most vulnerable to the abuses and exploitation. So many of them are even restricted to mobile phones, not to say social media. So with that, we do have reach out to different Facebook groupings in the Facebook, because for migrant domestic workers, they will certainly want to look for their friends from their home country. So we reach out to different groupings from the social media and talk to them. And some migrant domestic workers may have better employer, Or maybe we talk to the employer to allow the workers to have weekly day off to come out to do some work. And then bit by bit, she also know in the neighbors who are the other migrant domestic workers around. And then we talk to them, and bit by bit, try to get the workers to have day off or time off to join the organizational activities. We do have some successful case turning a migrant domestic workers without day off to become having day off and become a leader. Yes, so we have cases when, for example, in Malaysia, around 5 years ago, there was a migrant domestic workers leaders who were being requested by another migrant domestic worker, her friend, to buy some sanitary products, napkins for her. So that worker bought the sanitary products and napkins for her friend, and she was knocking at the door, and then it was an employer. So the employer was so surprised. That is a Malaysian case. In Malaysia, in general, the migrant domestic workers don't have any weekly day off. So the employer was so surprised. How come there was another migrant domestic workers can go out and go around on Sunday and buy the sanitary products and napkins for her own worker? So then the leader talked to the employer. Yes, I have the weekly day off. My employer give me how she feel better for herself, etc., etc. And that inspired the employer, and that employer later on allow her own worker to have weekly day off and to join the organizational activities. Another problem is the private employment agencies. Very often the workers paid huge amount of money to the private employment agencies. The employers, some of them also pay a sum. Then the private employment agencies are basically the controlling body for both the employers and the workers. They want to make sure that the workers will pay the agency fee in debt, and then they will ensure that the workers will not will be totally under their control, so that they can ensure the money will be paid for the excessive agency fee. The employer also pay a sum, and with the traditional thinking, domestic workers being maids and servants, they feel they are their property. And so once they pay the agency fee, it strengthens their feelings of owning the domestic workers as maids and servants and property. So so they further restrict the domestic workers on freedom of movement.
Okay, so for migrant domestic workers, it's harder because they're from a foreign country. The employer is much more biased against them, have a greater control over their movement.
Yeah, and the biggest problem is even the government don't see the private households as somewhere that you can check on. Because yeah, we respect privacy, but at the same time, these private households are also a workplace. Once you have you have hired somebody, then there should be labor inspection. The workplace is just the same with other places, workplaces like factories and shops. But these private households are not being checked, not being inspected. And the domestic workers themselves are often do not have access to complaint channels. If we come to the police station, if we come to the labor offices, they also have a general feeling that we are maids and servants, and especially when there are no domestic workers laws, then how will you file a complaint? So yeah, so this is a very big problem here.
So you mentioned like how domestic workers are seen as maids, servants, almost treated like slaves, and you have worked in this movement for decades. So have you seen like a big shift a large scale shift in the attitudes of employers or governments in sort of recognizing them as workers, especially in those countries where there are laws have come in? Did that sort of help maybe bring the shift?
I can see it's really shifting. I will still remember in 2011 when we got the C189, the Domestic Workers International Labor Convention adopted. It's like, oh, we cannot believe it. It's like magic. Yeah, we have been just doing a lot of organizing, making changes. We feel it's like little things we have made changes, but then little by little, then the change become big. Even we could get an international labor standard on domestic workers. So the same is like our organizing work, which is daily basis. We handle and solve a lot of matters and disputes and abuses and cases and do education and training. The change on the workers themselves to recognize themselves as a human being, as a worker, being able to speak up to the employer, being able to be confident, more and confident to their own employer and also to the society, to speak up in front of the village head or the government officers and other people. So these, when we talk about this, we are talking about also to enable the society to have gender equality, to have women leadership, when we have women and domestic workers to speak up for themselves. And very often, when we are handling cases, for example, when there are bills, the employers just see domestic workers are maids and servants and nobody. But then suddenly when we mobilize and show up and turn up in front of the employers, then they feel scared in the way that how come these domestic workers can speak in front of me? That kind of like a magic in front of the employers, because they have been looking down on domestic workers, and then they speak up suddenly. Then they of course they never imagine that can be like that. And especially in the mass media, if you have a voices and leadership represented in the mass media and the public, then you have a face. And it is the domestic workers who are talking about their issues. So, and the issues are real life issues. It's not made up issues. So so these are all changes, and I have seen there are bit by bit changes, and these are big changes.
Yeah. So the shift has almost come from bottom up,
Yes.
bottom up, and also internationally, like because of the international recognition, it strengthened the bottom up
Yeah.
empowerment. And it's because of domestic workers are more organized, speaking up more, that now they're being recognized more.
Yes, especially when a woman, being a domestic worker, being a migrant from poorer country, to speak up, and then how the society cannot reject listening to them. That's the change.
Yeah. And Fish, before we let you go, I know you've been part of the domestic workers movement for more than 20 years now. So, what inspired you to join the movement and what keeps you going?
Frankly speaking, in the beginning, I didn't expect I would be working in the union for so long. I did come from a workers' family. My mother was a child and garment worker, and also do some part-time domestic work. And then my father is a construction site workers, not really the very lower ranking worker, but like a low ranking site construction site manager, that kind of thing. So I just started to work to, maybe I have some feeling on social justice, just like that. I just started like that, like everybody else. And then I started, in the beginning, I thought I would just work for 2 years before I will look for some new things. Yeah. As young people, we always want to try something new. But then I keep on staying in the domestic workers movement. I think one thing I feel so much touched, especially is the time when we are dumped with a lot of problems, being poor, poverty, economic crisis, family problems, too many problems around us. But then at that time I was the frontline organizer, and then we have weekly weekly gatherings of the members, and then everybody just share their situation, problems, and also some happiness, sometimes their experience and wisdom in cooking or whatever. And when we bring a problem, and then everybody is speaking, yeah, maybe we can do that, maybe we can try to solve the problem in this way and that way and that way. And I can see there is some hope. Okay, we are faced with tremendous big problems around, but then having workers being together and talk with each other and share our wisdom, we bring hope. And then we try different things, activities, and try different ways to solve some problem bit by bit. And then we also can make the change. So I really feel it's the hope that we can bring by being together. And of course, we have protests and meetings with the government officials. The first workers' action that I organized was a protest at an employment agency. And then at that time, the domestic worker was so scared, and then she was hiding behind from the banner. And later on, so she was the MC for a big Labor Day rally. and the first meet up with Labor Secretary in my lifetime, in my organizing lifetime, was a shaking hand action. So with the domestic workers, we discussed that, we work in domestic work, and then our hands become like rough. Our hands are very, very rough, and we also suffered from some occupational illness. And then let's organize a shaking hand action with the Labor Secretary. So at the meeting, each of us shake hands with the Labor Secretary, so that let make him to feel how rough is our hand. So that was my first labor meeting, the meeting with the labor ministry. So it was very fun. We out of the difficult situation, agony, and we are able to drive some humor, like the shaking hand action, and also some hope and action. So, and even the building of the confidence to be able to stand up and speak up means a lot for everybody, and that is basic humanity, I would say.
Let's hope that there's more hope in the world, and
yes,
more
by
people join
being
this
together, bringing people together, we can always have hope.
Thank you again, Fish, for joining us today and giving us these amazing insights into what it takes to organize domestic workers, both locally and regionally. I think the stories you shared with us today will really stay with us. Domestic workers' rights are, as you highlighted, extremely difficult to fight for when workers are so isolated from each other and don't necessarily see themselves as workers. I hope that organizing in Asia grows from strength to strength. And thank you for listening, everybody. To read more about the domestic workers movement in Asia, please check the links in the description. In our next episode, we'll be joined by a special guest from the International Labour Organization, who will walk us through different legal frameworks available to domestic workers in Asian countries. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
A Sonologue production.